Hello, and welcome to the Chapter 1, Part 2 lecture on the themes in the study of life. In this lecture, we're going to discuss living things and how we study living things. You should use the information in this lecture in conjunction with the Chapter 1, Part 2 guided notes. And when you've completed the guided notes, you should use that information to complete the Chapter 1, Part 2 pre-class quiz that's posted on Blackboard. Let's get started. The bodies of all living things, from bacteria to fungi to plants to human beings, are made of the same basic molecules or the same basic components. All of our bodies contain carbon and hydrogen and nitrogen, for instance, just in different amounts and arrangements. This slide illustrates that concept nicely. Look at this pile of blocks. Notice that from this pile of blocks we can build three very different patterns. The patterns all contain the same basic blocks, just in different arrangements. The bodies of living things are built in a similar fashion. Now, when we study biology, which is the study of life, we can study living things at different levels of organization. For instance, maybe today we're just interested in the molecules that make them up. So maybe in these patterns, we're just studying these blue squares, the individual molecules. On the other hand, maybe we're interested in something a little more complex, the groups of molecules. Maybe those represent an organ. So we can study the organs within these individual organisms. Or maybe we're interested in studying the entire organism itself, the entire collection of these molecules and organs, and how they work together. So the first thing we're going to discuss in this lecture are the different levels of organization at which we can study living things. So we're going to start with the smallest level, which are the atoms, the smallest known particles, and we're going to work our way up to organisms. And then we're going to talk about a few levels that exist that are bigger than the level of organism. Now, this system of organization works really well for large, multicellular, complex organisms, such as ourselves, and such as things like trees and fungi. But not all living things have all of these levels. For instance, it might surprise you to find out that organisms like sponges are really just collections of cells, but they really don't go above that level. They don't really have real tissues or organs or organ systems. They're really simple organisms. Other organisms, such as amoebas and bacteria, they just go to the level of cell as well, but we still consider them living things. So not all living organisms have all of these levels, but all of the really complex ones have these levels. So let's start at the bottom and work our way up. The smallest known particles of matter that act predictably are known as atoms. Each different type of matter has a different type of atom. So there are carbon atoms and hydrogen atoms and nitrogen atoms, and they all behave a little differently from one another. Atoms consist of subatomic particles known as protons, neutrons, and electrons, and we're going to talk about them in more detail in Chapter 2. Now, if we take two or more of those atoms and put them together, we get something a little more complex. We get something known as a molecule. Examples of molecules include water, H2O, carbon dioxide, CO2, and so on. In this molecule, you can see the individual atoms represented as these little colored balls, and you can see that they are connected to one another by little bonds. And again, we'll talk about what the bonds are more in Chapter 2. Next, if we put molecules together into larger groups, one of the things we can build are things called organelles. The word organelle literally means little organs, which I think is adorable. So these are like little organs that exist inside living cells, and these little packets of molecules each have a specific job. They do something for the cell. For instance, you've probably heard of the nucleus. The nucleus is a little packet that holds the DNA for the cell. You may also have heard of a mitochondrion. Mitochondrion is an organelle that produces energy for the cell. So they all help the cell function. Now, if we put enough organelles together into the right configuration, we can get the next level up, which is actually the first living unit we've talked about. Molecules and organelles are not alive, but cells are alive, and all living things are made of cells. So now we've got something that's alive. Here, for instance, we have a plant cell, and you'll notice that if you look inside, there are organelles inside, and there's a bunch of different kinds. Different types of cells have different types and arrangements of these organelles, and that's what makes them behave differently from one another. If we take two or more different kinds of cells and have them working together towards a common purpose, we get the next level of organization. At that point, we have something called a tissue. There are four major types of tissue found in the human system. There's connective tissue, which connects things together; epithelial tissue that makes barriers in the body, such as the outside of your skin or the lining of the heart; there's muscle tissue, which makes up the muscles; and there's nervous tissue that makes up the brain and nerves in the spinal cord. Now, if we take two or more types of tissue and put those together and they are working towards a common purpose, we call that level of organization an organ. So I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of the really big organs in the human system, like lungs and liver, stomach and intestines. Each of those structures is made of more than one kind of tissue, and they're working together, and each organ has some kind of job in the body. However, consider this. Something as small as a hair follicle can have two or more kinds of tissue inside it working together. So, for instance, a sweat gland inside your skin will have more than one kind of tissue, and the job is to produce sweat at the right time. So even something as tiny as a sweat gland can technically be considered an organ. That means that your skin isn't really an organ. That means it's the next level, an organ system. So let's explore that. Let's keep going. If we take all of the organs that are working together in a body towards a particular purpose and we put them together, we get the next level up, an organ system. I'm sure you're familiar with the digestive system. Here it is. And look at all the different organs that make up that very complex system. The stomach, the intestines, liver, pancreas, colon, all of that stuff has to work together in order for the digestive system to take in nutrients and distribute them to the body. As I mentioned before, your skin isn't really an organ. We often call it the largest organ in the body, but really by definition it's an organ system. And it's an organ system that consists of thousands of tiny organs all working together. Now, if we take all of those organ systems in the body and we put them all together, we get one organism. And here Richard Simmons is our example of one organism. Now again, not all organisms have all of these levels. So when I say organism here, I'm talking about a large, complex, multicellular organism. So that gets us to the level of organism. But what if we have multiple organisms or organisms of different species? How do we organize that? For that, we need these levels of organization: population, community, ecosystem, and biosphere. Let's discuss what each of these means. If we are examining all of the members of a single species in an area, we have a group called a population. So for instance, if we looked at all of the humans that are in a room, we would have a population of humans. Now if we expand out a little bit, we can include other species. So here we have a population of kids and dogs and plants. If we're just looking at the living things in an area, but it's multiple species, we refer to that as a community. It's all the biotic factors. Next, we need to take the abiotic factors into account as well, the non-living factors. So in this example, we have people and dogs and bacteria and fish living in the ocean and plants in the background. And we have the abiotic factors like the soil and the air and the sunlight. All of those things constitute the ecosystem. So there are coastal ecosystems, a rainforest is a good example of an ecosystem, etc. It takes into account both living and non-living things. Now finally, if we put together all of the ecosystems in the world, we get one big unit, which is the Earth, which we also refer to as the biosphere. This is just another quick illustration of the levels of organization using plants as an example. So you can see that it starts out at the largest level, the biosphere, works down to ecosystems, communities, populations, and organisms, and then it goes inside the organism to look at organs, and yes, plants do have their own organs, including leaves and stems and roots, tissues, cells, organelles, and finally molecules and atoms. Hopefully you've been following along and taking good thorough notes on the guided note pages. And if you've been following along, you will have reached the first Your Turn section on the guided notes. Your Turns are sets of questions that allow you to practice the concepts while you're working through these videos. I do suggest that you do the Your Turn questions because the questions on the pre-class quiz, which is required at the end of this video, are going to be very similar to these Your Turn questions. So take a couple of minutes and answer the Your Turn questions.